After the Youthberg dominance of the Set 7 meta, as well as what we got to see at World, it's finally time to move on to new heights for the English meta with the release of Set 8 recently, Minerva Rising, together with, of course, the Chronojet Stride Deckset coming out in just a week's time in English as well. Now, of course, here in Japan, I've been able to play with the Chronojet meta a bit earlier. We actually had it before Set 8 came out, so we had a bit of a different pace in Japan. And Set 8 luckily brought in a bunch of decks that felt like they were able to fight with Chronojet on the same level, in particular Eva with her new support as well. So in this meta-analysis, we're going to take a look at basically the decks from Set 8 that got good support, as well as the decks that are actually at the top. And all of the decks that are being shown today are sourced from the VG Paradox website, which I do recommend you check out. Our good friend Fuzzy takes care and shows us all the results from various events all over the world on his website. You can check any deck list you want from any tournament that happens that is reported there. And before we get into the meta-analysis, I have been going pretty ham on both YouTube and Twitch as of late, so if you like this video, please do give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I am trying to reach for that silver play button eventually, and it's going to take a while, but if we can make that process a little bit faster, that'd be pretty cool. Also, I'm moving to a new apartment in April, and it's going to be very expensive, so if you consider becoming a YouTube channel member, that is also very much appreciated. But anyway, let's get into it. We're going to go through the nations in order and see which ones have been winning recently and which ones have been struggling recently, and we're going to start off with the Dragon Empire, and the deck that we're going to be featuring first is Tamayura. So the Tamayura list comes from the Hong Kong Deluxe 4th place team, and as you can see, this is full of a lot of the new cards, as well as some interesting changes in the order lineup as well. So as you can see, the ride line itself is the same as before, in order to make sure that you can kind of circle your dolls, you know, and loop them in the early turns. 4 of the Broken Toys order, of course. This is the shop promo that existed from a few months ago in Japan, and of course in English I think it is beginning to be distributed as well. Essentially allows you to look at the top 7 to find either Rarami or Ririmi, and even if you don't, you can get them from the drop and then put those selected cards into the soul, and then if you have both of them in the soul, you draw card 2, so it actually replaces itself while building up soul and thinning your deck, which is an insane card. And we see that a lot of Tamayura lists have actually been dropping the Blitz order in basically wanting to adapt the new offensive normal order that is a Fox art that you can find off the ride line that lets you soul blast 2 to call a Ririmi Rarami from your drop. So this can be either the existing grade 2s or the new grade 1s if you want, but you can actually call out the grade 2s, and then if you soul blasted the grade 1s as the cost for this card, you get to just count +1 for each of them and call them out. And then they of course function as strong boosters. And we still see the Folktale being played here as well as another way to just thin the deck. I personally do play a very similar list to this as well, but I've seen quite a few lists in Japan winning in shop tournaments and stuff where basically they don't play anything but Ririmi Rarami in the main deck as rear guards, and essentially just choose to get that consistency in order to always have the grade 1s, because even on the first grade 3 turn you can just make columns of Ririmi Rarami grade 2 and grade 1 on both sides, and then that way you basically put all of them into the soul through the grade 1's effects. And then you have cold targets on empty circles for Tamayura's on attack effect, which is also pretty nice. We also see a departure from draws here because of course now you thin the deck so much and so aggressively with the new Broken Toys order as well as with Folktale that you kind of end up decking out sometimes through overthinning if you do run draws, so the fronts have been adapted here instead. Moving on, we have Overlord that's been doing pretty well, and I'm going to show 2 lists. One of them will be before the addition of the new promo, which is about to come out in English if I'm not mistaken, and the other one will be after the inclusion of the new promo, where the list does change quite a bit. So this first list we're going to take a look at is from the top 4 of the Trail VGCS Winter. So this is a very typical Overlord build and kind of the one that's been around for a while, but because you guys have Halb in English now, I think it's worth to kind of resurface the list and talk about it again. But generally speaking, and run stuff like Brachio 4 still, this is basically Natsuki's build that he did really well with, running that extra copy of the regular Overlord in the main deck as well, because of course it is still going to be a good card even if you do need to persona write it, but of course you mostly want to hit the end, and of course it gives you another target to hit off of the Burning Horn. But the second list is the one that I want to talk about a bit more. So this is the second place Oretan VGCS, which is technically a set 9 event, but there's no set 9 cards in this list, so I hope you guys will forgive me in showing this. But as you can see, the deck changes a lot because now the end is run in the ride deck and the regular Overlord is in the main deck, and you want to see Overlord in the regular, like the regular Overlord in your mulligan, because you want to ditch it for one of your ride costs, because the new promo promo, Alder Hatchet Dragon, allows you to say that if you went second, if your opponent's grade 3 or greater, you can retire it and then choose a Overlord named grade 3 from your drop and put it to soul. This is really strong because going second, you ride into the end immediately and then use him to put the regular Overlord into the soul to get the end's full resign effect with the extra power without losing drive checks right off the bat without having to wait for turn 4. And this also means that you don't have to wait for turn 5 in order to start persona riding on the end, which was one of the weaknesses of the deck before, where it was just a little bit slower than everything else in the format. With the inclusion of this promo, the deck has gotten a bit faster, and that's kind of what we see usually with these really good shop tournament promos, is that decks typically get a lot faster, and the already fast decks basically get new toys and tools to work with. So that's it for the Dragon Empire side of things. Now let's move on to Dark States, and of course this is going to be the Chronojet part, because that is the Dark States deck of this meta and basically the strongest part of the metagame. And for those of you preparing for Springfest, I hope you're ready, because there is going to be a Chronojet on every single team and there's a lot of different ways to build it. The first build we're going to show, of course, is going to be the first place Deluxe Natsuki's team's Chronojet, and this is kind of like the build of Chronojet, where you're running a 3-3 line of Chronojet Dragon and Badifu as your grade 3s. Some people have been asking why you run only 3 Chronojets, only the 2 in the main deck, and like, why do you run less grade 3s? And the reason why is because you expect to play a lot of mirror matches when you're playing Chronojet, and the mirror match is oftentimes decided by who can play grade 2 game better and not ride to grade 3 to not give the opponent first stride, much like it was back in the G era. Because of that, the more grade 3s you draw into, the more they clutter up your hand. But of course, against other decks, you will want to ride up to grade 3 and just like swing until you can stride, and in those instances you can use the grade 2 ride line Smoke Gear Dragon to search out your Badifu for the discard cost for later if you want to draw more cards, if you want to use them as a 23k beater. And if you need more Chronojet Dragons in hand to use a stride cost for your next stage, you can use the Steam Breath Dragon grade 1 in order to just ditch it from your hand in order to get the Chronojet back from your drop zone if you've already found all of them from your deck. On top of that, the kind of god combo of this deck, of course, is the Swirler GG, where you need to see these in your opening hand at all costs. You call Swirler down, you soul charge 1, and then you call down GG, she soul blast 2, and let you draw a card, and you get to swing 3 times on your opponent's face on your first turn going second. Gungan Ram does the same thing in terms of providing you soul. Of course, Swirler does gain power once you're on grade 3 or greater, but Gungan Ram is also sometimes played as like 2 or 3 copies, and people reduce the grade 2s and 3s in order to be able to play the early game even stronger and get more soul and more draw power. The best grade 2 in this deck, of course, is gonna be that wonderful Upstream Dragon, which allows you to, function as a 15k attacker that goes back to deck and calls a grade 1 to back row. So you can basically swing with a column that's like a grade 0 and a grade 1, attack with your Fate Rider, which is usually your first stride, and then use Fate Rider to put your trigger back to deck, call down a grade 1 like GG or Swirler to where that trigger used to be, and then on the side you can attack with the Upstream, which will then tag into a grade 1 behind the grade 1 you called off a Fate Rider, so you have a full column to attack with for your 4th attack. On top of that, when the game gets long and you're close to decking out, you can actually put Upstream Dragon back to your deck and actually not target anything, so you basically get to stick with a few cards left in your deck, even at the dire situations. The trigger lineup, of course, is 8 crit 3 draw, because you do need some draws, just because you do discard for costs like next stage, but honestly speaking, it's mostly that fronts feel really bad in this deck because of the way that it attacks. Like, the only times that fronts feel good is like on the next stage swing, and even there you'd rather see crits most of the time, and you also need stuff to discard in case things get dire, so the draws can help. Now, there's a lot of different ways to build Jet, and even though, you might be seeing like, oh my god, Swirler, that's such an expensive card, I don't want to invest into it. Here's an example of a build which was the first place in the Deluxe in Hong Kong, running Falcade Performer, which unfortunately has also become a lot more expensive in recent times too. But even this is not where Jet builds end. There's a Japanese player called Yanishi who I think even runs a YouTube channel as well. And he went on like a 3 or 4 win streak with Chronojet in different shop tournaments, like back to back to back, not running Swirler and not running Falcade, but actually running most of the cards from the base Chronojet Stride deck set and trying out various cards like Eden in order to fight the mirror. Or I think it's called the Gearhawk, which is like a grade 1 that when it boosts a reroll and it hits, I think, you get to basically like make up to 5 attacks in Chronojet, so it's pretty interesting. So while I'm showing you these 2 builds of Chronojet, this is not the like extent of the limits of this build. As you can see, even in the second build there are a lot of the good cards that are staying, but there's no Swirler, no Gungan Ram, and instead they are running the Amazement Magician, who says when she attacks you may soul charge 1. This of course usually works really well in conjunction with Swirler because it powers it up as well, but this just gives you the soul for GG in order to keep drawing cards was also really good. It also gives you Soul for the Argandia, which is the grade 2 from the Stride deck set, which works as a either 10k or 15k shield when you put it to the Guardian Circle, depending on if you have a face-up unit or not. So overall, there are so many different variants of Jet that you can definitely explore with, and I'll be covering different videos and like going through the deck in more depth in its own video for a more like the optimal competitive build deck profile, but I'm also planning to make one of a more budget style Chronojet deck because I think this is by far the best entry into competitive Vanguard that we've ever had in the most recent years, and I think that if you don't let yourself get spooked by cards like Falcate and Swirler, you can definitely build Chronojet on a budget and still do really well based on player skill alone. Now we move on to Brandt Gate, so of course it is time to talk about my beloved favorite deck, Eva. I'm going to be showing two different lists, the first one of which is a list that has been pretty popular in Japan during the start of the set 8 meta, which is quite different from the way I would run the list. And then I'll show another build which is kind of like what the build looks like now in Japan after we received a very specific promo from a manga, which is actually insanely good support for this deck too. So this first build is the Trail CS Winter First Place Eva. So as you can see, the new Obscurate is run as 4 copies because you expect to play the mirror match quite a lot, and the grade 2 Obscurate is insane in the mirror because you get to shut down your opponent's 20k shield on the field by just swinging into their front row. 4 copies of Waberos, I personally feel this is a bit much, but it is, you know, it's first place. It did find success in a very stacked event, letting you Soul Blast and draw cards while getting power. It's literally GG but for Brandt Gate, which is pretty impressive. And then in order to make sure that you never break and find your orders at all times, the Arven Robust is being played at 3 copies, which lets you essentially, you know, let him function as a 23k attacker and also find you orders as long as you're searching for orders that exist in your order zone. My only problem with this guy, unlike Combine Rusher, is that he never comes back. So your Obscurades will always come back through the grade 1 order, and your Combine Rushers will come back when you set orders, but Arvent is like, once you overcall it, he's stuck in drop zone forever. So that's one thing I don't really like too much about the card, but it's still very strong because it is a 23k attacker that of course only scales when you Persona Ride. And of course we have to highlight the brand new order. The world is a blue laboratory. This is an incredible order, in my opinion one of the strongest cards that Eva could have ever gotten. Lets you on set look at top 5 and call one, which is insane because that triggers your Obscurades on place effects. And if you have some spare soul, you can Soul Blast 1 and rest it, as well as 2 other, or just rest 3 research orders in total to give a unit with a glitter ability plus 5k. So this can either be your Eva or your Obscurades. So that is also very cool because that helps you push out that extra bit of shield value from your opponent, you know, turn after turn after turn if you have the soul for it. However, this list does run draws, which I also greatly disagree with because I think that you will deck out, especially when you play the mirror match. And the second list is a 4th place Trail CS Winter list, but even though it finished top 4, this is my preferred list for the most part. So as you can see, we have the inclusion of the Versatile Assembler. This is a card that says you Soul Blast 1 when you place it, look at top 7 of your deck to find a set order and add it to your hand, and once per turn when your other rearguard is placed by one of your effects, you get to give it boost. So give Assembler boost. He's a 10k booster slash attacker that also functions as an order searcher. So instead of Arvent, he makes 33k columns with grade 3 Obscurate on turn 3, which is pretty impressive when your opponent is still on grade 2 going first. This list does run just 4 of the regular PGs without running the Blitz Sentinel, which I think the Blitz Sentinel is still worth running, but if you, for example, don't have it or can't afford it, obviously you can skip out on that, although this deck is sadly pretty expensive in English. And then on top of that, we see 4 copies of Combine Rusher, where you'll notice that both these lists don't run Bubble Mine anymore, and I've also dropped Bubble Mine completely from my list too, because I feel like in this meta you can kind of just like balance out your CB and just don't be too greedy trying to do every single effect you need to, because cards like Combine Rusher are more so for when you go second, helping you fight back against things like Jet or anything else that tries to push damage super hard early. So in the Japanese meta we have like Ebisu, which of course I'm not going to cover in this video because it's meant for the English players, but Combine Rusher kind of exists for that going second place. So going first you don't need to CB for Combine Rusher, and therefore Bubble Mine does not feel as necessary because for your turn 3 you just need 2 CB for Eva's act skill and Eva's on attack skill. So that is it for Brandt Gate. That those are the only decks succeeding right now. Orphist of course saw a great success at Worlds, but it hasn't been doing as much ever since we got into set 8 in Japan. I will give a honorable mention to SA's Arkhite list, which of course is the new alternative build for if you want to play one of the mad scientists, I guess, of Brandt Gate, which of course trades the kind of like big cert consistency of Eva for big massive attack power and still being able to tutor a lot of cards. So Arkhite of course gives you the multi-attack, and then you see the Combine Rusher being run here as well. The Kaiju PGs because you can search them with the order together with also being able to search your Persona Rides, and runs the set 1 Kaiju grade 1 that says it gains plus 2k when it boosts. So basically it's a 10k booster, but if placed by Arkhite's effect, of course it's going to be a lot bigger than that if you have another copy in the order zone. So this list he's found quite a bit of success with, and he wrote an article about this deck as well, which I think is worth reading even if it's through Google Translate, so I'll leave that in the description for you guys to check out. Moving on to Keter. This is of course where we highlight some of the existing decks as well as the new edition of Minerva. First things first, we're going to show off the Trail CS Winter First Place Youthberg. So this Youthberg, as you can see, has not changed too much, but of course we are seeing a reduction of Gust 3 copies and Maple at 3 copies, and Maple at 3 is pretty important because in the Jet meta, Maple will be sent back to bot deck a lot. So you want to see multiple copies in your drop zone in order to like kind of cycle into them again once, you know, your opponent keeps sending them back to the deck. This list is a bit different from the way that the English side of the meta likes to build Youthberg, because people like to mix Schneisel together with the Karubide in English, but we see that in Japan, of course, they're still going full on the Schneisel, and we see the one copy of the Grail, the Regulus piece, that gives you Persona Ride even if you don't Persona Ride, which is also very, very good. But of course, the new kid on the block is Minerva, or not so much new, I guess she is more so of an OG here. And this is the Hong Kong Deluxe First Place Minerva, and I quite like this list, to be honest. There are some cards that are sort of staple in this build. Of course, 4 of the Minerva, 4 of the Chamomile, 4 of the Melissa, 4 of the Angelica feel like all are must together with the Cider, because Minerva needs to discard Genesises to restand, and you need the Melissa and Chamomile to be maxed out in order to do your multi-attack shenanigans, and the Angelica is your counter charger slash the thing that turns on your Minerva, so that's also pretty important. And also because Cider bounces herself back to hand, you open up those circles for the Melissa to be called to as well, which is really good. But then we have 2 other cards that help with the deck in other ways. So the Drilling Angel essentially lets you recycle the cards like Chamomile and Melissa that you Soul Blasted out and intercepted with or got retired, that you can then put back into the Soul and then call out again with Minerva skill, etc. And then we see people either go with Karubide or the Cadwalla. Now, Cadwalla allows you to do more multi-attack combos in battle phase because you can Soul Blast out the Chamomile for its cost while it retires itself to add cards to your hand, so it's quite clean and doesn't like overcall anything, you don't minus. But Karubide instead is a main phase Counterboss 1, Soul Boss 1 to search and plus, and therefore if you Soul Blast out the Chamomile in main phase, you basically build a board without having to commit from hand as much, which in the long term does save you cards, which is pretty nice. And then of course the 1 copy of the Grail in order to make sure you proc Minerva's Persona Ride for bigger power even if you don't Persona Ride. Overall, this deck is pretty strong, and as you can see, this list apparently doesn't actually run heals. So this was, I actually only just now noticed it when going over it. I was like, oh cool, 8 crit, where's the heal triggers? Of course, I think generally speaking, you do see heals being played in a lot of these lists, usually in place of the front, because crits are just really, really strong in Minerva because she's a restanding Vanguard. But we see that the first place here chose to go for full aggro and ignoring heal triggers. And Keter is going to be the most diverse feature of this meta-analysis because you can see we also have a Phantom Blaster Overlord among the ranks as well. Phantom Blaster Overlord has received a brand new promo, which is the Kriduna. She's a really strong grade 2. She essentially says that when she's retired for your Blaster Vanguard's cost, she counts as 2 units instead of 1, so PBO can, you know, sacrifice just her and already be able to activate its effect. And when she is retired by your Blaster Vanguard's effect, if your opponent's Vanguard grade 3 is grade 3 or greater and you have a Blaster Dark on your rear, you can choose that Blaster Dark to give it the skill that when that Blaster Dark attacks, you can discard 1, and for that battle it can activate drive checks, but at the end of the battle it will retire itself, which is actually pretty nice because, you know, that means it won't get bound by random stuff and just removed. And you can see that people are running, you know, multiple Blaster Darks now to make sure that they don't get removed. Now I have seen lists that only run 2 copies of Kriduna because of course it needs your opponent to be on grade 3, so it's more of like a going second card. And I've seen some players actually say that this leads the deck out quite easily because of how much you start drive checking all of a sudden if you do it every single turn. So that might be a reason to not necessarily max out on her, but maybe run her at 2 or 3 copies as well. But overall, she's a big support for PBO that has helped this deck pick up some tops. This list in particular comes from the top 8 of the Trail Winter CS. Next up we have Stoicheia, and there were actually 0 topping Stoicheia decks in this entire meta, which is pretty shocking to think about. But I feel like I did see Magnolia after getting Inlet back, doing okay, but I think the tournament took place before the set 8 meta, so therefore it's not categorized as part of the set 8 meta. But of course the Magnolia Inlet list is kind of the same as it used to be. Some people putting in some of the newer cards, but hopefully we see some Stoicheia presence in the set 9 meta-analysis going forward. We do have one Lyrical build to take a look at, which of course is Stoicheia, who is kind of like the success story of Lyrical going forward after Arkhite and friends have seen their downfall and Michu hasn't really been picked up as much. The big change in Stoicheia, of course, is that it is running one copy of the Grail. Keep in mind though that, you know, in these order-reliant decks, like how Stoicheia is, if you play the Grail, you won't be able to play any other normal orders that turn. But generally speaking, Stoicheia wants to play her order in the earlier turns, I feel like, and not so much in like late game, which is like when the Grail comes up. It's like once you start, like you've gone through all your personas or you haven't drawn one for like turn 5 or something, then you fire off the Grail and you usually already have your soul set up by that time, so you don't need the normal order as much. And if anything, you've already won on that turn anyway, so it's a pretty safe bet. And so that is going to be it for this meta-analysis for Set 8 and Chronojet. So look forward to some upcoming content for more in-depth looks at Chronojet itself, because it is the deck to prepare for in this meta, and you really need to know your Chronojet matchups and how to beat it. And honestly speaking, it might seem daunting at first, but Chronojet is definitely beatable in the Set 8 meta. I think it's smart that Bouchard English released Chronojet after Set 8 rather than before Set 8, because before Set 8, it didn't feel like it had as many things that could fight against it on a same platform, but now in the set 8 meta it does feel like it's a lot better, and going into set 9 it feels like it gets even better because there's even more decks that can fight it, and we'll see how Messiah ranks up in that as well, with its release coming up in Japan in just 2 weeks. So with that everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Which decks were your favorite, and what are you enjoying the most out of the set 8 plus Chronojet meta, and what are you looking forward to in terms of Springfest and upcoming events as well? Looking forward to hearing from you in the comments below, but other than that, that is going to be it for me today. Hope you enjoyed today's video. But otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.